Hello, Emory families. Welcome to our Family Friday webinar today. It's Friday, June 18th, and we're excited to have you with us. Today, we're going to talk about accessibility, services, and accommodations. Some of you, we hope you've been with us for a while, might have joined us a couple weeks ago for our welcome, and then last week we talked about immunizations and insurance. But for those of you that are here for the first time, welcome. We've got a survey to get you going and get you set. So let us know if this is the first time you're joining us for a Family Friday webinar. And we see that it's a good percentage. So we're glad that you're here, and we see the numbers going up on how many are participating. And we know, as you all know, this is recorded, and we know we get hundreds of people that watch it afterwards. So any questions that our participants ask today, we know will be helpful for the future for folks that are going to be asking questions or wondering, and we'll hope to answer those today. So we've got 85% of you have been to more than one, so that's great. So we appreciate that. Let's look at what we got. Let's see, we're getting more. Yep, 85%, and we've got several participants, so we're getting ready to go. So today, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about accommodations. I'm joined by my colleague in the Office of Undergraduate Education, Sherry Obrens. Sherry, if you want to wave.
Hi, everyone. Happy Friday.
Right, Sherry and I co-host these all the time, and we're going to be chiming in with questions for our expert. And Allison is an expert. She's been at Emory quite a while now, and she is going to talk with you about accessibility, accommodations, and what we do at Emory to help your students help themselves. So Allison, if you'd like to introduce yourself, and I'll give it over to you.
Thank you so much, Bridget. It's so wonderful to be here with you on a Friday. And thank you so much for this opportunity just to connect with the parents. As Bridget said, my name is Allison Butler, and I'm the director for the Department of Accessibility Services. Overall, our main focus is to make sure that we're providing equal access and participation for any student, employee, staff member with a disability. But specific with our students, all of our accommodations are based on, individual experiences, and what we do to work with them is to remove barriers that might limit or impact their educational experience while they're at Emory. So how do you get started? To register, it's a pretty simple process. You have to complete, your student has to complete this registration form, and that's their self-report. So it's just giving us an idea of, some of their demographics, what disability they have, what their experience has been describing that, in the past, if they've ever used accommodations before, that's very helpful information. And then they also upload documentation, and this is all done electronically. And so once they submit that, we have the information's housed. It's, we will work through each case, individually, and we start our review process for all of our incoming first years, July 1st. There are some students that have already started to register way early on, which is fine. But we're going to process all the first years, beginning July 1st. And the reason for that is there's a lot of staff vacations, in the summer. But also more importantly, there's a lot of work that we're doing to prepare for fall. And so we want to make sure that we get all those things prepared. And then once we start reviewing in July, because everybody's accommodation plan and depending on what we're reviewing and what's needed or any follow-up, that dictates the next steps and your status. So for instance, some accommodations are pretty seamless, and they're easily just, it's you will have the same, your student could have the exact same thing here. So for instance, extended test time, that's one of our most commonly used accommodations. But like, for instance, extended test time does exist in the university setting. So, that would be approved like pretty quickly. And so with that approval, we send a message to the student through their Emory email, just that a welcome session will be scheduled in August, right before the kick of the semester. And there will be there'll be guidance about how to set up, their accommodation letter and use our Accommodate portal to submit that. All that stuff is electronically, accessible, and students can download and request anything additional in the future. So we help them navigate that whole process, and we also just share like proper steps and tools of communicating with faculty and just getting started for the semester.
Allison, before we go on to our next slide, this is something Bridget and I have been talking about a lot as we're introducing parents, especially new college parents, to transition of care, and especially around disabilities, where we know a lot of times parents have been the voice, the advocate, the paperwork keepers for this student registration form. I'm assuming, and you can correct me, that it is student driven. So they actually have to be the ones that log in and complete it to kick off this process. And that might be a change from the past, especially with those who've had IEP plans or other things, right, that parents could initiate. This really is yet another thing that students themselves have to initiate.
Yes, it's definitely a very different. Everything is is initiated by the student. And one of the things we do promote is self-advocacy, but it doesn't mean as a parent, you can't support them. So you can be with them while they're doing their self-report and help guide them, help them with questions that they may have and navigate that, but definitely support from the side. We appreciate that. Thank you. So just a little bit about our Emory population, and this isn't stagnant. We're still accepting new registrations. We continue, even that July 1st deadline that I mentioned, that's for priority, just to ensure that the accommodation plan will be in place by the beginning of classes in fall. After July 1st, students still register with us throughout the, summer as well as going into the fall. So they will be processed. It's just that we can't guarantee, the time frame around that, but they will be processed. But just a little bit of just to give you some information about what our population looks like. So as you can see, the majority, and this is over the entire campus. So this includes undergrad students as well as graduate students. But as you can see, mental health is like our largest population of students. Next is ADHD, and then chronic medical conditions. So as you can see, there's just a variety in scope of, types of disabilities that, of individuals that register with our office. So by class level, as you can see, right now, our seniors are the largest population that we have right now. And that's because they've been with us the longest. Some seniors are still registering new, like if they have a newly acquired condition, but throughout their 4-year time frame, they've been here the longest, and they've gotten started, depending on their own situation and what experiences they've had. Also, we serve graduate students, as I mentioned before. So just so you know, depending on where your student aspires to in the future, there are accommodations in those settings as well. So academic accommodation. So when the self-report, the documentation that we review, it's all important. It helps us figure out what the specific functional limitation is, so we can make decisions about what would be the appropriate academic accommodation. So for instance, we do, like, some of that information from the IEP is helpful. The information from, observations from your student's medical provider, all that information is really helpful. So we look at all of that. Your students self-report, and their, some description of their own experiences. all that's very helpful, because one of the things for us is that us working at Emory and our involvement in the programs and, just connections, we can make determinations about what accommodations would be more reasonable in this environment. So you are aware, like there's so many things that change from um, uh, like high school to college. And we have a lot of information on our website just to, discuss like the transition and, just key ideas to think about and prepare your student. So other types of accommodations, as we mentioned before, this is an individualized process. And so, depending on what the disability is and, your student's experience, that's how we make decisions, in accompaniment with the documentation. But this is how we make decisions about what would be appropriate. And so the setting and environment is really important. So in housing, let's say if it's an advising situation where we talk about like priority registration or reduced course load, those are some things we have to talk through and connect with those specific departments. Housing, the one thing that is a large request, this semester is single room housing. And so that's really definitely hard to guarantee. We really do address each case, on an individualized basis. And we will make some decisions, but at the same time, we have the housing that's available to us. So we have to figure out what makes sense based on the environment that's presented. So these are just some other types of accommodations that could be provided. So just a couple of common missteps that students have made, and these are lessons learned. Delay of disclosure. Sometimes, the timeliness is really important when it comes to the accommodation process, but sometimes depending on, your student's experience, a lot of things that they might have had to navigate in the past, it's so variable about why, certain students don't disclose right away. The challenge with that is that if they wait, because we serve the entire campus community as we're reviewing and making these accommodation plans and decisions for other students, there is a backlog. It doesn't mean we're not going to get it done. It's just that we can't rush the process. So anyway, each student we have to sift through and determine what would be appropriate. So with that, if you're registering in the fourth week of classes, if your student is registering that late, we cannot guarantee that they would have, let's say, an extended time accommodation or something like that by the end of the week. So anyway, delayed disclosure can be very complicated. Also stigma, we do understand that, the variability of experience, depending on where, folks come from, we definitely understand that. So one of the things that we try to engage and promote is that it's better to register and never use the accommodations. You don't have to. Everything's initiated by your student. So even if they register, they still have to request an accommodation letter every semester. It's not registering with us again. It's just that their faculty members change every semester. And so there's nobody, going to reach out and say, hey, what accommodation do you need? They're not identified in that way. So the accommodation letter from our office is a tool to start the communication with their faculty member. And so that's what's requested. That's what has to be submitted every semester through our portal, our database portal. And so the thing is that because of that collaboration and connection that's needed with the faculty member, especially if we're talking about academic accommodations, sometimes, students' experiences in the past, professor perspective, a lot of that can compound, the reasons why they might not want to reach out or disclose. But we always encourage, even if you have no intention of using an accommodation ever in your time at Emory, still register. So also stress overload. Some students just wait until they, really have their symptoms are really heightened. They're in a flare up and they request an accommodation. We cannot assist in a crisis. We definitely understand and know that these anxieties exist. We understand and know that, the crisis is present and it's challenging at that moment, and we will connect them with the resources that are needed. But the registration process isn't reactive. So we really have to plan and prepare, and there's a lot of steps in the process, just to make sure that your student would have a specific accommodation plan that would be the best for them. Going.
And Allison, let me chime in here too, because that's a really good point, and also give you a break because we have you doing everything today. Is that families, as we'll mention in other webinars, we do have a student intervention team. So if your student comes to campus and doesn't have issues before, you never know, they might develop migraines, they may develop an issue. We do have a student intervention services team that will help that student and we'll work with them. And then in the future, if they do need to work with Allison's office, they can do that. So just so you know, we do have a separate team that you will hear from a little bit next week. So we want you to know that.
And I would just, I mean, this slide is probably the most important slide, I think, Allison. So as long as I've been at Emory and working with students who maybe want to start college with a fresh leaf and go, nope, I got it. I'm very aware and I know what I need, so I don't need to register. I just think that is a misstep. So if we think about registration as the step one of the safety net, and as Allison mentioned, if you never initiate accommodations after that, that's okay. But because registration itself takes some time, and Allison, what you just said is that registration is not a reactive process, I think is so very important. And the next step as parents helping your students through is actually making sure that your students follow up, initiate. I talked to a parent the other day who said, I know that all the accommodations are in because I submitted all the paperwork, which was great. But her student actually had then not initiated any accommodations for the year. So it's a multi-step process. It's not automatic. It takes time and conversations. And so just reiterating, Allison, you've said it so beautifully, but all of that, start early, have those conversations often. And sometimes students think that they've done something and they've missed that, like, oh yeah, every semester I needed to reinitiate. It's not re-registering, it's reinitiate. So really important.
Thank you so much for those points of points to remember. Definitely another thing to consider is that we support temporary conditions. Like that's typically the broken dominant hand or a broken leg, but we do not provide accommodations or support anything dealing with a single occurrence. So for instance, any like COVID related matters, like certain, we have certain campus entities that will be there to support, student health, et cetera. If there's any illnesses, we've heard mono, all of those specific things. We really support, specific things that, specific conditions that are long-term, or a substantial limitation in a temporary form for a significant amount of time. So we're talking like, beyond like maybe 6 weeks or, like 3 months or something like that. And then lastly, accommodations do not equate to success. It's important and valuable to managing your students' condition. So I usually like to share, I have 2 nephews that have disabilities. And so one of the things that I try to share and give them guidance on is that, part of the adulting experience is managing your disability. And so that looks differently for everybody. And so that's why it's so important to, really help them self-advocate, really help them understand the resources that are available to them at the institution, and just be proactive. And so the accommodations are a piece, of that. And so it's making sure that they have equal participation, because let's say, if I'm a student with depression and I have specific flare-ups of my condition that, impact me in certain ways, that's different than my peers. So the way that I show up in class, the way that I'm, experiencing, having to take an exam, some of the challenge that I might have with attendance, my peer doesn't, experience. So in accommodation, make sure that you have equal participation, based on the fact that, you're managing your condition. However, it does not equate to success. It doesn't guarantee that your student is going to have an A. It doesn't guarantee that, there's certain decisions that might have to be made. The main thing is that it's part of managing the disability. So as long as you can get your student to understand that, and that's the work that we do, to promote self-advocacy, because we want our students to be the managing those things. And the great thing about registering with us, they don't have to keep telling their story. It's not about that. It's not about what your disability is. It's not about any of that. It's just about, what are the accommodations that you're approved for, and how we can, how does this work, based on this particular class, let's say, how does this work in housing, et cetera.
And Allison, I'll jump in again, because so much of what your office does partners with the academic affairs side. A lot of this then it's the next step of the conversation, right? So once students are registered and connected with you and your team, when things come up, then we connect back with academic advising to make sure dropping a class is the best option versus maybe taking an incomplete. Or do we need a whole medical withdrawal, because sitting out and really taking care of whatever the chronic issue is paramount for health and safety and well-being, so that they can be successful when they're ready to return or taking a leave of absence. And so working with the advising team to make sure that students are also have the end goal in sight, which is graduation, that they're making progress, that we're not just continuing to kick a can down the road, but we really are making a plan that is in the best interest of your student is so important. So we have a lot of cross campus conversations, but it definitely starts with Allison's team.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sherry. Yes, I would like to share this wonderful, it's an open letter to parents, and it's nice to hear from another parent. So Jane Jarrow, I put this in the chat as a PDF file. If you have any problems accessing, I know Bridget will have it available, in other forum for you to access. But anyway, I just invite you to read that. It's really helpful, especially just from a parent's experience of disability for, of their student having a specific disability. Jane Jarrow is, she has a consulting agency and partners with the professional organization that oversees accessibility services across, on a national platform. And so she's she's an executive director, and she works on providing disability information and providing that information to help in like transition and support for students with disabilities. And specifically last year, her student had cerebral palsy and was graduated and was going to college. And so she, at that point, felt moved to write a letter that she allowed us to all share, just about some of the things that she was thinking through and trying to support her student and, helping them be a better self-advocate and preparing them for this unknown environment. So I think you might appreciate that.
Hey, Allison, we got a question in the Q&A that might be helpful for us to answer for everybody, and that's about the housing accommodations. Are they also a semester or for the full year?
We typically, well, it's all case by case, but we typically it'll be for an academic year. In some cases, it could be permanent, for their entire time, that they're here.
Okay, great.
But yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think there was a question too about a foreign language requirement.
Is there a foreign language requirement, right?
Yes.
And is there a waiver?
There is a foreign language requirement. It's not necessarily a waiver. There's a way that depending on what's presented, what we see, we could make a recommendation for a student to sometimes American Sign Language might be a good fit out of all the languages that we have to offer. That's one that's not available on campus. So one of the things that we will connect you with is advising and make this specific recommendation, and they'll work with you on, identifying, a university where, they would accept the credits for ASL. And some of our students have taken that in the summers. Sometimes they go home and take it, sometimes they stay in the area. So, but there's not a waiver. So with that, the parent-to-parent conversation, the one thing that you can help your student do is initiate the registration process. And, definitely feel free to aid them. And, this is a great way, if you haven't, have these conversations about how their disability has impacted them. And if, what have their experiences have been, and like some of the things that, they are fearful of, and, have these conversations, as they're, working through and registering with our office. The thing is, we're very, the initiation process is really important for us. Like, we're the only ones that have to know what your disability is. No one outside of our office needs to know that information. And some students are, amazing self-advocates, and they want to share, and they want to, identify what their disability is, and they have every right to do that as well. But when you're asking for a specific accommodation, that has to be vetted through our. No other person can make that determination of what the accommodation would be or what's needed. So you really want to work with our office, because we make sure that, all your information about your disability, none of that's being shared. Is what we're trying to do is help determine eligibility and figure out what would be reasonable based on what, the request is.
And Allison, we got another question that might be helpful for you to answer. And the question is, how recent does the doctor's information or the medical information need to be? Does it have to be within the last 6 months or the last 12 months? What is the requirements for that?
We'll put up some information from the website. We have specific guidance about documentation. It really depends. So it really depends on your student's condition. So for instance, if we're talking about LD or ADHD, we prefer 2 to 3 years, specifically because your child is between 17 and 18. It depends on when they were last tested. So for instance, we've worked with some students that they may have been tested in 6th grade, but they weren't tested at the adult norms. And so that's why it's important for us to have that information, because some things change, in the developmental process. So even some things that might be newly identified, or some things that may have, gone away. So we really want the most updated documentation, and we look for, the age that they were tested. For a chronic health condition, it's really important. We would prefer within a year, mainly because with chronic health conditions, depending on flare-ups, how they're managed, we want to make sure that they're connected with the specific medical provider, they're observed, they have the treatment that they need. That's really important for their continuum of care. And a lot of things that we discuss too is just making sure that they have the connections. If they're coming out of state, making sure that they, have a plan, when they set up, when they come out of state. So it is variable. We've had students with traumatic brain injury, and so we really appreciate, we need updated documentation. So even if they register with us, we usually want something updated within 18 months because it changes so much. So yeah. So as I mentioned a little earlier, plan for continuum of care. So if your child is coming from out of state or out of the country, you want to make sure that they have, identified supports. If there's any treatment or medications that are involved, that they have access to that. And you want to make sure that, let's say if it's counseling, we have resources on campus, but, you know, depending on the level or what's needed or the treatment that's being, you know, rendered where they are, making sure that that can be duplicated in another setting. And then supporting your student as being an advocate, you know, definitely support from afar. But if you want to, sometimes, you know, we might want to make the phone call for our student, just be there when they are making the phone call, but let them initiate. And consult DAS, like I said, with your student. We have a main line you can reach out to. The information was presented earlier. You have access to that. You know, go to our website, look at information. We have specific information for our new students getting started. We just have a lot of information out there, you know, just about documentation requirements, transition, you know, to a higher education setting, et cetera. And next, I wanted to talk about the resources. So the wonderful thing at Emory is that there are so many different types of resources that are available for all students. So there's academic coaching program that's set up, there's peer tutoring, there's learning assistance. We also have, you know, depending on, like I said, everything's so individualized. So depending on, you know, what your student is presenting with, we'll connect them to the learning specialists on campus, just so that they can already start setting up a plan, you know, for the semester. There's a lot of skill building workshops and events that are available. There's a writing center that's, you know, there and available. And the learning management platform that we use is Canvas. And a lot of our faculty will use that, you know, in tandem with like their face-to-face classes. They've used it, you know, in our remote settings as well. So anyway, there's a lot of academic success resources and tools available, information out there for your students as well.
And I'll say that, you know, coming to college is a transition for all of our students. So disability or no, these are skills. And the reason why we have these things, it's kind of universal design for all of our students, is because they're helpful for all. But I'll make an extra plug. You know, if your student has received tutoring in the past, let's get them connected with ePass early, so they're not waiting until after that first midterm to get the services kind of set up. If they know that they need some extra help with time management or planning, let's do that in the very first 2 to 3 weeks of the semester when they have all their syllabi. The beauty of college is that most of the professors tell you the whole arc of the semester on day one. So they'll know when all of their tests are, they'll know when their assignments are, they'll know when their final exams are, and making sure that they have plans in place, both either to initiate accommodations or just to use some of these other services too. But I think that this group, especially for students who have had accommodations in high school, are usually our early adapters of this, which is amazing. I wish they shared that more. But it kind of goes back to the, I'm going to try college without my safety net and just see how it goes, especially in the first year. That is not the time to test it out. So that's why we want to highlight these things and just really make sure that students are bookmarking these. As a parent, I think sometimes too, just not asking if they've done it, but reminding them of this website and of all of these resources. And we'll talk to our students about this in their ECS 101 class in the fall too. But just getting a jump on it and getting the lay of the land is so helpful. So Allison, I think we've come to the end of our your formal presentation. You've covered so much. Thank you. And our chat has been answered as well. There is just a quick question, which is best for time management and planning? We have a few different things. If it's students who want to work with other students, we have academic coaches. It's free. They set up the same way they sign up for tutoring and can work with a peer who's been through it and knows how to manage both the academic and extracurricular expectations. So that's something. And we do have students who might need a little bit higher need in connecting with, Allison mentioned our learning specialists. So we have professional staff who could help that as well. But so much, I think students learn so much from their peers. Again, like Bridget and I will, maybe Allison too, we always get questions of which class should I take or which professor should I take? None of us have actually been students at Emory. So also promoting that sophomores, juniors, and seniors or other of our peers who we have in who've had these experiences give great and wonderful advice and kind of manage expectations. That's why we have so many peer programs as well. And then setting up all of these things, we have open access. Once students come to campus, there's a portal that they'll sign into and search for students. It's like an online scheduling tool. So we promote that starting very early in our semester. Your students were going to get a lot of information. I will tell you another thing that would be helpful is just making sure that they're reading our emails. So we have something that goes out every Monday called the College Weekly that updates things like important deadlines or highlighting resources. And for first year students, we have a follow-up email that goes out either Tuesday or Wednesday of the week to reiterate some of the most important things we want them to know. So it's on the website, there's a link. Students can't sign up for anything yet. Obviously, they don't have their classes or their schedules yet. So starting that first week of the semester, all of these things will become open and available. Allison, is there anything else that you want to add or share? We've had your wonderful assistant director, Megan, helping to answer questions in the chat too. So thank you to Megan.
Thank you, Megan. No, just getting started early. Definitely going to the website. As Sherry was saying earlier, read, make sure that your students are reading. There is a lot of information, and we haven't been able to navigate, having all this content on social media. So we know they want to have fun on social media, so they have to go somewhere else for the content. So just encourage them definitely to, look at the website, see what's, there to offer, and they can prepare some questions, for us.
And I love that preparing questions. I think like the last thing I would want to piggyback on, Allison, is sometimes it is confusing, or you think you have it all done and you're not sure. And you go, well, I don't want to ask a question, or I don't want anybody to think that I didn't read. It's absolutely okay to ask questions and to follow up with any one of us if something is not clear, or you're just double checking that, the documentation was received, or you did kick off your accommodations, or reminding that it does have to be done every semester. So that's, I think, part of the self-advocacy and growing, learning how to kind of manage the adult side of being a college student. So as parents and family members, reminding your students too that that's a really great skill, and we welcome questions. No such thing as a bad question. Just a reminder to all of you who are still with us that our Family Friday series continues next week with transition of care. So thank you so much to Allison, we talked a lot about transition of care today with accommodations. Last week, we talked specifically about immunizations and health insurance and transition of care. But next week, our directors of student health, counseling and psychological services, and psychiatry are going to round out these three conversations and continuing to talk about transition of care. So we hope that you will join us. We will take a break for the 4th of July weekend. And then starting in July, we're going to transition ourselves a little bit to talking about registration advising, learning in a hybrid world, finding community and connection, and then finally housing, dining, and residence life. So thanks everyone for joining us again today. I'm signing off from me, from Sherry Obrens, from Bridget, and from Allison Butler, and we hope that you have a wonderful weekend. Thanks so much.